With 9/11, I was teaching over at the mall, and I heard about it. We didn't know what it was. An airplane crashed into a big building in New York, and I went to Kahunaville, which was a restaurant there, talked to the management and said, this looks like history. Can we take a look and see what happened? And we thought it was just a private plane that had hit one of the major buildings down there. And so we got there and we're watching it. And as we were watching it, the other plane came in and took out the other building. And it was just stunning. And I was speechless, and so were the students. It was horrific. And out of shock, I probably should have had them leave right away. I didn't. We couldn't believe what was happening. And literally watched the first tower come down. And just how horrific it was. Literally people jumping out of the building. And so I had to remove the students. Called my wife quickly to talk to Pam and just said how was she doing, and she said that other planes were headed to other areas. Something will stay with all of us the rest of our lives that went through that. Terrible loss of life.
I remember distinctly that I was in choir, and the teacher came out of her office that was in the choir room, and she said, I am not allowed to tell you this because the school has told me not to, but I think that you should know as your right as a citizen. So she went over to, she didn't say anything else, she went over to the TV and she turned the TV on, and we were in choir, we were just watching the planes hit the towers in New York. So that's kind of what I very specifically remember. And that was a hard day. Something else happened in our school the day before that. We lost a student. So kind of all those memories mixed together. It was an interesting time for sure.
So 9/11, I was a senior in high school. I went to East Kentwood High School, and I was sitting in my child psychology class. It was also my second year of being here in the United States. And when I heard the news that America is going into war, I panicked because the reason I moved to America is to not be impacted by war, since this is what happened back in my home. And I came here to live the American dream. So I was truly devastated, and I panicked, and I did not understand that it would not mean necessarily that I had to move again. And I did not understand that my home here in America would not be bombed or attacked. So that's where I was during 9/11.
I was a freshman in high school in my seminar class, and I remember them coming over the intercom and just saying, turn on your TVs. And at that time we had big TVs in our room. So we turned it on, and I remember thinking it was just something out of a movie. And the rest of the day was like a standstill for everyone.
I was working and living in Philadelphia. I was 25 years old, and I was working at a university right in downtown. I took public transportation into work every single day, so I got off my train and went into my office, and all my office mates were gathered around a television because the first plane had just hit the towers, and then we watched on the news live as the second plane hit, and then kind of were stunned, didn't quite know what to do. And so we were gathered around talking, and that's when we heard that the Pentagon had also been hit. And if you know where Philadelphia is, we've got New York City, which is about 2 hours northeast, and Washington, D.C., which is about an hour and a half south. And Philadelphia is right in the middle. And kind of freaked out because we didn't know what was going on. And the city shut down. So because I took public transportation shut down in the city. We didn't have cell phones, and everybody went outside, and we just gathered on the streets in the middle of downtown Philadelphia. And it was people kind of talking with strangers, trying to figure out how to get in contact because the phone lines weren't working, you couldn't get through. And it was this moment of just being overwhelmingly scared and not knowing who to turn to or where answers were coming from and what was going on. So it was pretty intense.
September 11th, 2001, I was in the first grade at Grandville Elementary, and I clearly remember we were walking on our way to gym class when we heard the news that our country had been attacked.
I was in my classroom, 131, right across from the auditorium, and Mr. Denning came over to me. He's next door to me, and he said, "Hey, I think a plane just ran into the World Trade Center." And initially we thought it was, just an accident. And it wasn't until after school that the truth kind of sunk in, and it was a really weird day.
So I was a senior in college, and I had actually a large term paper due on September 11, and I, of course, procrastinated on it and had quite a bit of this term paper to write. So didn't have my own laptop at that point, so I went to the computer lab. They had a 24-hour computer lab, and I got there at like 6 in the morning. And the paper was due later in the afternoon, and I found a corner of the room and I just went to work. So all morning long I'm by myself, kind of unplugged from the world. And when I walked out of the computer lab around noon, it was really quiet and eerie. There wasn't a whole lot of people around, which there normally would have been. And I get in the car, and when I turn on the radio station to look for some music, it's not music. It's some random guy I hadn't heard before talking. And I changed the channel, and it happens to be the same guy talking. And it was kind of like War of the Worlds thing, where this news broadcast had kind of taken over. So when I get home, I have all of my housemates glued to the television, and I had missed everything. I was not by it when the planes hit or when the buildings fell down. So I was kind of behind on everything, and it was a really eerie feeling. And so you kind of quickly call your family and the people you care about to check in on them. But it was a weird day for sure. But that's where I was.
I was in 5th grade library class, and we were all checking out our books, and the librarian had it up on TV, and then we were watching it, and all of a sudden the principal ran in, said, "Turn off the TV, there's a bunch of kids in here."
I was a senior at Grand Rapids Christian, and I was out in what they called back then the Commons. It was lunch, no, it was in the morning, so it was break. And all of a sudden, a bunch of senior guys came out of the office, very upset, yelling about how they're going to join up the army and start blowing these guys up. So then I went to my second hour, and that's when we figured out what was happening, and I wound up sitting on the ground next to a friend. And I saw the first tower fall, and we just sat there, and we just watched as these towers fall. The room was silent. I remember our teacher just was sitting there, just like this. And then I just remember everybody was upset the rest of the day. I went to work at MC Sports that night, and we had to lower the flag, which was very difficult. They didn't want to because it was stuck, so I wound up getting up there and cutting the rope so that I could bring it down. And we wound up actually closing early that night and going home. So I remember going home, and that's when I was really able to just sit and kind of try and comprehend what was going on.
Yeah, so I was in the 4th grade. We had just gotten done with our gym special for the day, and we came back to our classroom, and we saw the TV on, and the TV quickly went off, and it wasn't really till that night when you got home and turned on the news that we really saw and understood what had happened.
I was actually here. We were in school at the time, and if I recall correctly, I got a text from my wife saying that I needed to check the news to see what was happening. And so I turned at the time we had big TVs in the corners of our rooms, so at the time I turned that TV on and turned it to the news to see what was happening. And I remember by the time I tuned in, the first tower was fully involved and fully engaged. And then at that next tower, like shortly after I tuned it in, the second tower was hit by the second plane. And then reports came that the Pentagon had been hit, and that there was another plane that had crashed in a field in Pennsylvania. And it was pretty obvious and pretty apparent at the time that we were, we were involved in a terror event. Watching that plane fly into that other tower, that second tower, was it was unnerving. It was shocking. scary because the unknown now is going to occur, right? I mean, what's going to be the government's reaction? Do we know who did it? Is there some sort of message that's going to be sent? What's going to happen?
I was sitting on the couch of my very first apartment with my husband. It was our 1-month anniversary of being married, and he was getting ready to go to class, and I was watching the news, and I saw it happen. It was such a strange day because I didn't have to go to work that day, and so Wade left and went to his classes. He was at school at MSU, and I literally just sat on the couch and watched TV for the full day and couldn't process it.
I was a sophomore in high school, and I was in Mrs. Ungry's biology class. And I can't remember if they came over the loudspeakers, but we turned on the TV after the first tower had been hit. And I just remember the room being silent. And shortly after, we transitioned to third hour. And I just remember the hallways were, kids were just, struggling to process what went on.
I was doing my student teaching here at Grandville High School, and I was in room 160 when we found out about it, and I remember just being completely shocked by it all. And I remember seeing the live video that everyone watched of the second plane hitting the tower, and I remember when that happened, everyone was just like, "Oh my goodness!" One, maybe it could have been an accident. The second one was like, "Whoa, something's happening," and just a moment I will never forget. And I remember the rest of the day was kind of if you want to try and get some work done, let's respect those that want to get some work done, but totally understand if you can't. And we just watched television, and the days that followed were unreal. Everything on television was all about it. Even PBS Kids was all about it. And the one of the kind of neat shining things with all of it was the nation came together, and they were one, which was pretty amazing. But it's one of those events that everyone asks, do you remember where you were, what you were doing? And that's definitely one I will never forget.
Yeah, so in 2001, I was a sophomore in college at Central Michigan University, and I remember the day and the moment very clearly. I had a later start to the day. I think my first class started at 9:30 or 10. It was a beautiful sunny day out, had breakfast, and was walking over to class. And normally I would pass a few people on that particular day. I think I had a couple friends that were coming from a chemistry class that I'd chat with every week, and there was a lot of people coming back from campus, way more than usual. Seemed kind of odd that all these people were coming back. And somebody I knew passed by, and they said that classes were canceled. It seemed really odd for them to be canceled, and they said that a plane had crashed into one of the Twin Towers, and I thought that was really strange. I was imagining like a small passenger plane or something that happened to crash. Why would they close down a school in the middle of Michigan for that? And then I distinctly remember looking up in the sky, and there was a jetliner that was doing a U-turn. It was turning all the way around, and there was this big U of contrails in the sky, and planes don't do that. And I knew immediately that something pretty significant was going on. We all head back to the dorms, and really, that was it. We just sat there kind of in silence for the rest of the day, at least, just watching TV and trying to make sense of what was happening. And as it played out, you're waiting for information about what's happening. You're seeing the images, but you don't necessarily know what's going on, and there's broken ideas about what that is, and it's just a lot of uncertainty about what was happening and what it had to do with yourself, and were family and friends safe. So that's my etched in my mind memory of September 11th.
On 9/11, I was an 8th grader. I was in my science class, which I believe was during second hour, and I remember another teacher coming into the classroom and telling us that we needed to turn on the news. And I remember at that time it was a big deal to even have access to the news in our classrooms. And we turned the news on, and by that point, both towers had been hit, and I remember it being very shocking, especially seeing the way that adults reacted and seeing their fear and their concern. At my young age, I knew it was a very big deal and this was a very, very serious matter. And we went home that night, and even seeing our parents and their uncertainty, and just seeing the whole country wondering if this was going to happen again, not being sure if another city might be struck. And so it was just a very scary point on that day.
I was at home. I was on maternity leave. My daughter is 20, and so obviously I'll never forget the year. You know, it was when I was home. It was strange. I wasn't at school, so I don't have a perspective from a teacher being in the building with other kids. I actually didn't know anything about it until about noon, and my husband came home from work, and I was just like, "Hey, how's it going? How was your day? How's it been?" And he looked at me and he said, "You don't know?" And I said, "I don't know what? What are you talking about?" And he said, "Turn on the TV." And I had not had it on all day, so I turned on the TV and just stood there watching, holding my daughter with my mouth wide open, like, oh my gosh, what just happened? I can't even begin to believe what I'm watching. So all afternoon, you know, I was glued to the TV and just kept watching replays and went outside. I had some other neighbors that were home, that were stay-at-home moms, and it was the weirdest sensation going out and looking up in the sky and not seeing airplanes. I thought that was one of the strangest things that I've ever witnessed, you know, in my lifetime. Was just, there was nothing going on in the skies. And that's not normal. I live kind of near the airport, and so usually I see flights going over, but there was nothing.
I was teaching, and while I was in my classroom, it was back in the day when we had giant televisions like in the corner, and a student came running in and said, "You have to turn on the television. 2 planes just flew into the Twin Towers." And I thought, why would empty planes fly into the towers? And then I realized that they had been hijacked and were filled with people. And we had seminar, just like you have, and that was the time of seminar. So we turned it on, and about 2 minutes after we turned it on, we saw the second tower go down. So I watched that happen with a classroom of students and with a student teacher. And all of us who were there were forever changed.
I was student teaching here at Grandville High School. It was first hour, and my teacher, my mentor teacher, Mr. McDaniels, walked into the classroom and he said, "Miss LaRoche, I need you to stop. We're going to turn the TV on." And at that time, they were replaying the planes crashing into the World Trade Center. That day, it was just really, we didn't know what was happening. And one thing I do remember from 9/11 is walking out of the building and there were no planes in the sky.
I was actually a sophomore in high school. I remember sitting in geometry class, and I knew something was wrong because our teacher stopped the lesson and went back to her computer and started crying. And obviously we all asked what was happening, and then she turned on the TV and we saw. So that was a day that I don't think I'll ever forget. It was that moment where we just kind of throughout the rest of the school day just kind of sat in classrooms and watched the TVs. And I remember eating lunch in my car with some friends and just kind of wondering what the world was going to be like.
I was in 7th grade at the Grandville Middle School, and I was in my first hour science class with Mrs. Susan, and I think she was acting kind of off. I remember her kind of walking into the room really quick and talking with other teachers out in the hallway, and she turned on the TV in the class, and we saw the World Trade Center on the TV, And we weren't quite sure what was going on. I remember there was some confusion, and at that age you don't really understand the concept of terrorism or these kinds of attacks on our country. And so I didn't understand it very well at first, and it took me some time and over the course of a number of years to fully understand what happened.
And I was a first-year teacher at Grandville Middle School, and as a first-year teacher, I basically didn't know what I was doing anyways. But we turned the TV on right when students started telling us what was happening. We saw the news, and I felt like my job at the time was to put on a good face for my students and try to show some confidence that everything's going to be okay. And as we had the news on and we saw the second plane fly into the second tower, that's kind of when I realized there's something else coming. And for the rest of the day, for several hours, I felt like there's another shoe to drop. There's something bigger happening here. And I was scared to death. And I felt like I couldn't show that to my students. And that was one of the reasons why it was a difficult day. Because I felt like, in my mind, things were about to go off the rails. And I had to not act like that in front of my students. And now we know, looking back, that it was a pretty formative day for really the last 2 decades.
I remember vividly, I was driving in my car. I was a junior in college and I was driving to the restaurant where I worked. And I remember the dashboard of my Oldsmobile Alero. I remember looking at it and hearing on the radio that the Twin Towers had been hit. And I remember being shocked and just not knowing how to make sense of it. And then I arrived at the restaurant, and it was so long ago that we, in the bar area, there were still tube televisions up, and I remember walking in and it was completely silent, and everybody was just staring at the TVs watching the scene. No one really knew what was going on, and I remember there just being this tone of confusion and uncertainty and panic.
I was actually in the exact same room that I still teach in all these years later, room 270 here at school. I went to turn on, we used to have TVs in the corner of the room with VCRs, and I went to turn on a video for Spanish 1, and it was on a TV channel, and I saw the plane crash into the tower, and at first I was thinking it was like a movie or something, like I didn't think it was real. And then once I did realize, I remember just being so confused and scared, and I just remember, this isn't, it was a different time. I remember just with the students and I, we didn't know what to do. And so some of us just got together in a circle on the floor and just prayed for the families and the victims, because we didn't know what else to do. So I still have goosebumps when I think about that day, and yeah, I remember in those weeks after, that one good thing that came of it was just the unity that our country seemed to have. Like, everyone was so willing to donate blood and do like anything they could to just help their fellow Americans.
I was in 5th grade in Mrs. Hanson's class, and I remember her like hurriedly walking out of the room, and there were some teachers chatting in the hallway, and she came back and looked really worried and said that all of the kids need to go into the gymnasium, and that's where our principal told us what a terrorist was and what happened, and that we were going to be dismissed to go home. And I went home and just learned about all the stuff that happened that day, and my little 5th grade brain didn't really comprehend it.
Yeah, so I remember it being a gorgeous fall day. Felt like a little bit of that, summer still kind of holding on. And I was in my classroom, was teaching, and then suddenly over the PA, there was an announcement, teachers, if you haven't heard about what's happening in New York, you might want to turn on your televisions and check it out. And I'd been teaching maybe 5 or 6 years at that point, and that is not an announcement that had ever happened before, right? Nobody comes over the PA and says, turn on the TV. So I flipped it on, and there was this image of the World Trade Center with smoke like billowing out of the side, and we just sat absolutely glued to the TV watching it, me and then this classroom of students. And then as we were watching, the second plane showed up and slammed into the side of the second building, at which point we kind of realized like this probably was not an accident, like something is happening here. And suddenly it went from, oh no, this is bad, to like just felt like there was this weight. And I can remember my students having so many questions and trying to talk through it, and like, I didn't know what was going on. I didn't have any answers. And the day went on. I finally went home. At the end of the day, my firstborn daughter was just an infant. She's 20 now. And my wife had heard about it from her sister. She was holding our daughter. We sat there all night and watched, lit a candle and put it in the window. It was a thing that we were doing for solidarity. But I remember even on that day, this feeling like the world has changed, right? Like something has happened today, and it'll just never be the same.